but I think a lot of the best things come out of something difficult, traumatic, and they create like scarcity. Like I never had a situation where I was always worried about money because from a young age I had to support myself. So it was always a thing where my drive was not just monetary. Once I started doing well, I always wanted to give back. I've instilled that in my kids. But I think that if I had grown up where I didn't have that drive, I would have been lazier because I couldn't afford to be lazy.
Hi everyone, it's Rob Locascio, and this is another episode of Over the Wall. And I'm with Oz Pearlman, who's a mentalist. And this guy is awesome. He's been America's Got Talent. He's been on all the morning shows, Jimmy Fallon, just an extraordinary human being. Even more importantly, is I got him right before he's going to run the New York Marathon. He's an
Yeah.
ultra marathon runner. So I wanted to welcome to the show. Welcome.
Thanks,
How are you
Rob.
doing,
Thanks for
Oz?
having me on.
One of the things I want to jump into is this concept of the mentalist, and the show's all about the mental game. And you're at the top of your game. You do ultra marathons, you're running a marathon, but I assume everything you're doing has to do with the mind. It's kind of like it's kind of like the mentalist. Maybe we can go down that road a little bit and just talk, how did you get involved with this? What do you see as special about what you do using your thoughts, your mind, and we'll start there.
Well, my background, honestly, from a work perspective and from a schooling, is I went to school for engineering. So go figure, you know what I mean? I went to school for engineering and then I worked on Wall Street for Merrill Lynch. So this was not my pathway. This is not like I came from a family of entertainers. My dad was an engineer. My mom was a teacher. Nobody thought I was going into showbiz, myself included. But this was kind of my passion since I was a teenager. I saw a magician when I was 13. I became obsessed. Literally, it was like a before and after of my life. The moment I saw this guy do a trick, he brought me on stage. He did a famous magic trick called the sponge balls. They put like a ball in your hand, they snap, it turns to 2, 3. I was absolutely blown away. The next day I went to the library. I got every book I could. I read them cover to cover. I'm an obsessive personality. I think that's the case with a lot of entrepreneurs. I really dive in and I want to know everything. I want to meet everybody associated with it. There was a kid at my school who was a magician, and I drove this kid crazy, asking him a million questions. How'd you do these tricks? My background was I loved doing magic, and it was kind of my side hustle. I did it semi-professionally since I was about 14. I was doing it for money, just to pay for it.
At 14.
Within a year of me starting to do it, my mom was like, hey, I'm not buying more of these books and tricks. Like, you got to go make some money. So I was actually my third job. I already worked making bagels at a place called Bean and Bagel, and I was a busboy. So no, the hustle was real from a young age where my parents weren't giving me an allowance. That's not the family I came from. It was, hey, go make some money and work.
Where did you grow up, by the way?
I grew up in Michigan. I was born in Israel, but I moved to the States when I was 3. And my formative years from like middle school, high school, and then I went to University of Michigan were all in Michigan.
Gotcha. So you at 13, you feel like you found your calling, it sounds like. We talk a lot on the show of people finding their purpose and then going with it. But it seems so easy. Like I just jumped in and now I'm doing tricks and but to commit your life to it, it's not a normal life. Like people say, go to Merrill Lynch, like you said. But somehow you end up going a little bit off the path. I guess go get a real job, and then you end back in the path. Maybe you could talk about that because there's got to be a risk factor to that. Thinking you can make a living from it.
Well, there's huge risk factors. So one is I never thought it was possible. So I think it's kind of like if you watch a movie. I'm not the person who says, well, I'm going to be a movie star, because that seems like a insurmountable hurdle. How do you do that, right? There's no playbook. That's the thing about showbiz and a lot of industries, like starting your own company. There is no playbook. You can try to learn from others, but where do you find those other people? And then how do you flip the switch that makes you believe that you can do what they've done? And for me, that took many years where I did go to school and I thought the path was, get a real job. Like, that's what people tell you? And that's what I thought was what I was going to do. And that's what I eventually did. But throughout the whole time, there's a lot of things that really helped me. At the time, I would say they hurt me, but like my folks got divorced. They moved back to Israel separately, and so I was on my own. I was independent. When I say I had to pay for everything, literally I didn't have any money. So I was forced into having businesses.
At what age was that?
At age 16. I finished high school at 16. I was very young because I skipped 4th grade, and I have a summer birthday. So I was like, all my friends, I've always felt like the youngest person because all my friends are 2 years older than me. So I finished high school when I was 16. I finished college before I could legally drink. Keyword legally. But yeah, so every summer when everybody else was having fun, I had internships or I had businesses. I started a business with a buddy where we removed and installed boat docks. Like it was a sink or swim. If I didn't make money, I couldn't pay rent. So I kind of became an adult real quick. And magic was a great way for me to open doors because, and I've told this to people, if you could learn 2 or 3 magic tricks, it doesn't matter what you do for a living. Literally every job, it allows you to be a superhero in a moment, establish rapport, build trust, and make people like you. And it transcends languages. I've been all over the world. People don't speak my language. In Asia, I do an amazing trick. We connect. So it's kind of like a universal language of amazement. And it really did great things for me throughout. Like when I interviewed for Merrill Lynch, I don't want to say this, but off the record, I did magic because in my resume it says professional magician, from age 14 to whatever age. And so you don't think they're going to ask me about that? Are you crazy, Rob? So at the end of the interview, they're like, well, what's this professional magician? And then my interview, which was supposed to be 30 minutes, runs over by like 8 minutes. The poor schmuck after me, like they don't even know who he is because they're so blown away. And they like shake my hand and like, don't worry, you'll be hearing from us. It was, it wasn't even fair. So it allowed me to get a lot of opportunities that I don't think I would have gotten otherwise because of the way you build rapport with people.
But why is I mean, I guess I'll state the obvious, but magic intrigues us, right? As you said, and every time we have someone do magic, we're like, oh, but there's a lot of things in the world that intrigue us. But intrigues us. But there's something with magic. You see it from the other side. You're performing it. You're doing something, and it's tapping into something in the human. And I'm wondering what you see. What is that besides our imagination? Is there something else you see that
Well,
why we're so
look at
fascinated with it?
humanity and our drive. Our drive is to always advance, right? We're not staying at the status quo. Like I just listened to a Joe Rogan podcast where he talks about the one thing that we never stop doing is building the next big thing, right? Your product is always going to be bigger and better. They don't stop at iPhone 14s. We want to keep growing. And so it's like hardwired into our DNA to keep growing. And magic is something where it's amazing because it always stays ahead of what you know. So I think there's some sort of innate drive in us to be amazed. And when you see it, there's just a primal urge to be like, wow, and how did you do that? And what's interesting about what I do, which is I don't really do magic anymore. I love magic. I can do it, but it's not what I do for a living. I do mentalism, which is kind of a subset of magic where I don't have props. I don't need cards. I don't do things with sleight of hand. I've now just studied how people think, how they behave, and use that knowledge to hopefully be very entertaining and be able to guess things, do things that seem impossible.
So, I guess, is there some basic rules to how we think and act that you know? Like, what are those
Oh
basic things
yeah.
that you picked up? What are they?
Well, there's huge archetypes, right? So like a lot of the things that you'd study are the same things you would study in negotiations, which is group dynamics, is how do people act when they're one person alone, one-on-one, we all know this, versus how do they act when they're in groups? And how can you influence people in groups? And I don't want to call it peer pressure, but if I ask somebody to think of something, like if I tell you think of a number between 1 and 100 and you're by yourself, I know this sounds unbelievable, like there's just no way it's true, but if you're with other people, you will actually pick something different than when you're alone. And how many people you're with and how much time I give you between when I ask and when I cue you, it's almost like, think of it as the algorithm that social media has used to figure out what is the best thing to deliver to you. I'm doing that, but with your thoughts. So I've just been doing this for 25 years and learning how do people behave in all different situations. And I'm iterating every time I iterate. And that's why, knock on wood, my show keeps getting better and better because my data sets keep growing and I keep performing for more and more thousands and millions of people.
So when you're looking at a group dynamic, do people they're sharing thoughts? That's what your understanding is now? Is that
Well, I don't want to call it thoughts
or the
because people always say to me, are you reading my mind? And I go, no, because that denotes something supernatural. That sounds like I have some sort of psychic power, and I don't. So I'm very clear about it in my shows. There's nothing that I know of that I'm doing that's supernatural because I can explain my methods and there's other people that can do them, albeit not everyone's on the same level. But think about musical talents. I recently saw somebody at Carnegie Hall who was an amazing violinist. You could sit me in a room, put a gun to my head for a decade. I will not play the violin like that. I'm terrible at music. But my son plays piano. He's better than I could ever be. He's 6 years old. So there's certain things that you have a gift for that I would call a talent that's innate, and you can develop it. If you've got thick skin, if you're willing to practice, if you're willing to spend years. And what's weird about mentalism is there's not a lot of mentalists. If you look this up, you'll notice, you'll be like, There's not that many. Why is that? There's lots of magicians because mentalists are always bad when they start. It's like stand-up comedians. You're never good because you always will fail the first few times you do it, and you might fail for a long time. And most people, they can't get over that initial hurdle. So they don't get through it, and they go, you know what, screw it, I'm gonna go back to doing magic tricks. Because magic tricks worked every time, you know?
So when you look back then in your career, in your life, what was one of the failures that you can remember? You're like, God, I think I want to be a magician. I want to
There's,
get out. Like,
there,
was there a couple of these where you're like, I got to go back to like pulling the
oh
hair
man.
out of that, or yeah.
There were many, but thankfully for me, they weren't on big stages. So call it serendipitous. A lot of like the bigger things, a lot of time, you know what, when you're speaking of entrepreneurs, I've met people who want to scale their company, they want to grow, and sometimes that's the worst thing you can do. It's stay at a certain point, learn, and then wait for the right opportunity to present itself. You grow too big, you might actually explode. I had the same thing with America's Got Talent. I tried out for that show and I didn't get on. Very important to understand. Like people will say, well, you on that show, you did amazing. No, the first time I tried out, I didn't get on. And then 3 years later, I tried out again. So what happened in those 3 years? I can tell you what happened. Damn near 900 shows, a lot of experience, a lot of build, and I got better. And if I had gotten on that first time, I don't know if you and I would be having this conversation because I was never as gotten as far. So you sometimes have to think like, not about what you want in the moment, but what's right for you in that moment. And you sometimes have to wait. Waiting can be the best thing. Put in those 10,000 hours.
But can you, if is there like, could you tell me what happened? Like
Oh yeah,
when
yeah.
they were
So I
interviewing,
can
when they
tell
were doing,
you, oh my
you
gosh,
tried, you tried something and then it failed. Like
I've
what is
had,
it
I
that,
mean,
yeah.
I've had some failures on TV, like where I'm trying to guess a celebrity and I just hard stop said, you're thinking of John Travolta. And she's like, nope. And I'm like, really? And it's very hard to recover. When you're doing a stage show that's live, what you have that's lucky is a clock that continues. So hear me out. When I'm doing a stage show, I can duck and weave. It's kind of like a boxing round. If the boxing round continues, I can get out of a failure and maybe spin it. But
Okay.
when you're on a TV show where you have 3 minutes, and when the 3 minutes are up, you're done, you don't have any out. You don't have a plan B, C, and D because you don't have time. So in stage shows, most of the time, I can get out of it. And quite frankly, having a few mistakes in a live show actually makes it a little stronger.
Really?
Because if you get everything right, people kind of get desensitized. Think about if you watch a danger act where they throw knives at
Yeah.
somebody, and if they always aren't even close, then it's not exciting. When one comes close, you go, oh, you feel it in your stomach, the pit of your stomach. You sense that, fight or flight. So, man, I've had just so many things go wrong over the years, but lucky for me, they've gone wrong in places where it didn't negatively impact the trajectory of my livelihood.
But do you now start, you're creating your own unique material, I assume,
Yes.
right? You're developing your own things that no one's ever developed before. You're creating new things, right? You
There's a
just don't,
handful of people in my field. Some are creators and some are performers. So there's actually people that create for others. There's like consultants or people that are inventors who will create new ideas. They write books and videos. They release them
yeah.
within the community. And there's the rare kind of double threat or triple threat of people who perform and create. And I do both. I don't really like to do a lot of other people's material. I like to create my own.
So you create your own material. So what's the newest thing you've done recently? Like what's some like interesting thing that you've done that you're most proud of, in
So
what
I
you've
really
created?
like doing things where I elevate. So whenever you think you've figured it out, I go to the next level. So there's something in my show that I do where I'll have 5 or 6 people stand up and I'll guess something that they're thinking of. I like to guess, one of the big ones I like to do is if you could have dinner with anybody that's ever lived, who would you love to sit down and have dinner with? Because it really allows you to explore that person, what their desires are, what their interests are, and it's a great way to read somebody. And then for the last 2 people, I say, I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna have anyone in this room do it. And they literally take a Frisbee or a beach ball, they hit it, somebody stands up, I walk up to that person, I snap my fingers, and I say, tell those 2 people who they just thought of, and they tell both people. And I don't even get applause most of the time because people are so shell-shocked. And then you'll go up to that person, ask them, how did you do that? And they go, I swear to God, I just heard a voice in my head. And it's, this is, I'm doing this at, I don't want to say high profile events, but I've had like CEOs of Fortune 100 companies come up to me and they're, as smart and as serious as it gets at the top level and echelon of corporate America. And they're like, what the F, like they can't, and they'll have one of their, somebody in their C-suite is like the person who guessed it. And they'll come up to them and say, hey, don't BS me. How did you know that? And they'll be like, I just swear to God, I heard a voice in my head. And they're like, what do you mean you heard a voice? And so I like to just take things to the next level, and I create the idea first. So I say, how could I do that? Imagine if I just told you that story, Rob. I reverse engineer, how can I do that? How can I have that be the memory that you leave my show with? And that's my whole job, reverse engineering the human brain.
So when you think about the human brain reverse engineering, like dig in, unpack that a little bit. Like
Sure.
what does that mean? You know, like because once again, it's as deep as you can go on that because I just think you, like you said, you're not a psychic, but
Not a psychic.
you understand how people act, how they
Right.
respond to things, how they're in environments, whether they're groups. So that there's a gift you have that if we can get that out of you, because I think these are life gifts people could use in their normal day in their work lives. If they, there's got unpack that what's happening there.
Well, so like look at fields like behavioral economics, which are very apropos. Like me, I'm doing this in the sector of entertainment. At the end of the day, it's not like something, but look at that. Why is it that there's this mass effect where when the markets are tanking, people are like, I got to sell, which is the absolute worst thing you can do, right? Think about it. If you did it in a different way, you would be buying stocks. You'd be buying clothes when they're on discount. When something goes on 30% sale, buy it if the intrinsic value is right. But yet we do the wrong thing. So people always think I'm not predictable, but I go, yes, you are, because look at what the masses do in certain settings. And so I don't want to call it my gift, but what I'm able to do in the show is, keep in mind, I can't do this with everybody. So when I do a show, like last night, I did a show in Cancun. I flew back, I got in here, Rob's like, are you making it to the studio? I'm like, I'm making it, Rob. And I did a show last night for, I don't remember, several hundred people. It's probably about 400 actually. And everybody there thinks I'm not predictable, but my job is I find the people that I think are, and I can tell things about their behavior. And so somebody walked up to me after the show, and they're like, why didn't you guess my thing? And I'm like, I didn't know what you were thinking. They're like, really? You can't do it to everyone? I go, no. So I can find the right person in the right place to do the right thing
So
with.
you're saying you can look at a crowd and see and what people fit a mold, and you that
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think so do you. I wouldn't call it profiling. You can
no.
see body language. If you're in a room and you're trying to sell somebody, let's say you're a VC and you're sitting there, you know when your presentation's going terribly. You can see the body language, the arms crossed, the looking around, the fade in the eyes when you're not fully focused versus when somebody is entranced, you feel the palpable energy. You can see that you can guide them on a little bit of a story. So there's things that I'll do that are a little more challenging with certain people, and there's things that I'll do that are much, quote unquote, easier that I know have a higher hit rate with people that I feel have a little more resistance. And so I think in day-to-day life, all of us experience this too. You have like an innate feeling when you go right next to somebody as to what their personality's like. Like I can tell when my kids are lying like that, and I think most parents can too.
But why do we a lot of times like I deal with so many people in my life, right, and over running a company and stuff. You hire somebody and you're like, they just don't feel right, but you kind of double guess yourself, right? And so what do you think that is, knowing what you know about reading people and stuff like that? Why do we do that? We, like you said, we may know it doesn't feel right. I don't even know why. And then you try to figure out, it just doesn't feel right. It's not, it doesn't seem rational or logical, but and then people end up, oh God, if I could have got rid of this person out of my life a year ago, I'd be better off. But what is it that we do to not play into maybe what you do?
Well, I would say it's intuition, and I would say that I have a very heightened intuition. So that's where I say that it's not supernatural, but it's a heightened intuition, which everybody seems to have to a degree. But think about just like how humanity's evolved. You have to have those instincts that you act on in a moment to survive, and the people that survived over time, they pass that down, right? I mean, it's an inherent thing that you're going to pass down. That's a survival trait. And so what happens is, think of a game that requires instincts. I always say ping pong because when I was a kid, me and my dad played ping pong all the time. The best shots you ever hit, you don't even know how you did them. It just happened. Do you know what I mean? And what it was is muscle memory from doing it so many times. So for example, in my act, there's things that I've done that are like, I call them the benchmark. Like if I go eat at a Thai restaurant, I always get the basil chicken. So that's how I decide how good is the Thai restaurant, based on the basil chicken. I don't know if you're like me, but my wife is the pad Thai. But if I'm going to a restaurant, I got to see how good this one dish is. So I have certain tricks, and I call them tricks because, again, it's not supernatural, routines, tricks that I do over and over, and I've done so many, thousands of times. One of the big ones for me is guessing numbers. Guessing numbers and guessing colors, because there's a limited subset of what I can guess, and it's like allows me to test out what works on certain people and what doesn't. And I can just see which people fall into certain categories, what they're going to do. and sometimes even not only know what they thought of, but what they thought of first before they changed their mind, which really messes with people. Because most people are like, how did you know when I changed my mind? I go, because I knew you changed your mind because I saw your hesitation. People are like, but how did you know I changed my mind? You can tell. If you watch somebody, you can tell when people are changing their mind too. You can see it every single moment. They stumble over their words. They pause at the wrong moment. You can sense deception and deceit.
So that's what you're picking up. And then you basically from there work it to, because you based on pattern matching of your past and all these thousands of times you've done this.
Well,
So it's a
I don't have one golden rule. So like it's one of those things where it's jazz. I have 20 methods to do one thing, and if one doesn't work, I hopefully have fallbacks. And also, I have kind of what's known as a director's cut. This is why I can't just go in a casino and clean out the house, because they have people like me working there. So what I mean by director's cut is in a lot of what I do, you don't know the ending. So imagine you thought it would always play out this way, but if you saw the show 5 times, you'd be like, oh wow, it could have ended like this or like this or like this. So I have different ways to take it, and I don't telegraph where I'm going. So that's my inherent advantage. It's kind of like a
like in a, I get you. So you're flexible. You're not running
I'm
down a linear
flexible.
path.
I don't give you a linear path. I don't say you're going to think of this and I'm going to guess this, because then you know if I got it wrong, because it's very direct and easy. It's just a straight line. But if we start doing something, you don't know where it's going to go. I do. I know that I've got 5 make your own adventures, and as it's going, I'm seeing where you're going, and I'm going to take it this way, and this is where it's going to work.
So,
I don't
so
mean to be
what,
cryptic, but it's
no,
a
but
funny
I
feel,
really,
because mentalism is people that have literally spent, like me and other mentalists, we've spent years thinking about things that the normal human never even gives 1 ounce of thought to. Like, it's so funny because our lives are so, and it's something you turn on and off. So everyone always jokes to me, they're like, you're married? It must be a nightmare being married to you. I'm like, I don't do any of this stuff to my wife. It takes a very focused effort. It's not like it's happening at every moment of every day. I have to focus on it to do it.
but it's like I still want to unpack the brain. I feel like if you can unpack the brain for me, this like we had Deepak Chopra on here talking about
Yes.
consciousness, and we were talking about consciousness and what that means, and how like we're sitting outside ourselves, looking at ourselves, right, and in context to our space and our relationships, and like for you, like if you think about some of these what you've uncovered in the brain, which we could use in our practical lives, it'd be interesting. Like what are some of these like rules or not rules, but observations you have, you know?
Well, I honestly think that some of the things that are that are the most useful in day-to-day life, that have the best applications, aren't even within the realm of what I entertain. They're much more like social skills. So honestly, like one of the best books I've ever read has nothing to do with magic or mentalism, How to Influence People, right? Dale Carnegie, and Make Friends.
Dale
And
Carnegie.
yeah, like
Yep.
the classic, like people, I try to revisit that book every year or two, because you always glean more information. And some of the things that have done the best for me in my whole business life are not based on how I perform, but how I appeal to others and how I kind of deliver a value proposition, which is one, is be more interested in other people than in yourself. Like it's something I've seen time and time again. Like I did a show one time for Steven Spielberg, which was just incredible. You know, I was blown away because I'm a huge fan. I just love his movies. And at the end of the show, I had done something, and Steven walks up to me and wants to start talking, and we end up talking for damn near 20 minutes, and I didn't get to ask him one question. Do you understand what that was like? I was like, he just wanted to ask me question after question after question. And I've seen this with people that I've met that are, you know, billionaires, visionaries. Like I'm lucky that my career allows me to meet a lot of people that I admire and respect. And time and again, those people are so curious. And what do they care about? Others. Rather than talking about my movie and this and that, he wanted to hear and glean everything from me, like absorb all the info he could. And I've seen that, and I've tried to do the same thing in my life, which is most of the time when I meet people, I deflect and I listen about them and I learn as much about them, and you'd be surprised what you can pick up from that. So learning people's names is a big one, which I know sounds so silly, but a lot of people don't realize when they're listening, when they're speaking, and how their brain reacts. So whenever you're speaking or thinking of speaking, your brain doesn't take information in as effectively. You can't do both. You can't, it's like rubbing your stomach and patting your head. Have you ever done that trick? It goes the other way. Like your brain is actually hardwired. So I will always turn my brain off when somebody tells me their name. I just stop. I make myself quiet. I repeat their name back to them. I shake their hand. And if I can, I will make a comment or say something to make sure I've got it. And their name is imprinted on my brain. And so I will walk around a party. I'll know everybody's names. And it's not a memory trick. It's mostly just listening and making sure that it imprinted on my memory when I said it. And I can't even tell you how much of an effect that's had in my whole life, where in my show, at the end of the show, somebody comes up to me and I'm like, hey, Ralph, great to see you. And he's like, how did you know my name? I'm like, I met you 3 hours ago, man. Why would I forget? So that's not really a mentalist trick, but it's something that in your life, if you can remember people, have a personal touch. If you want to take notes, I take copious notes. After every single show, I get done with my show, I spend 20 minutes writing down everything that happened. Also notes to myself, kind of like a comedian would, so I can recap, go over stuff, see what I could have improved, lines that were funny, but everything about people in the show, because if I meet that person a year or two later, I'm either going to remember it or I can look at my notes, and they feel so great when you remember them, and it brings me back to that moment. And that's been a secret ingredient of mine for a decade.
It's amazing. I mean, that's why when I think about you're at the top of your game in what you do in life, and you think about some of these things that you're doing, it's being personal, being open, being curious, listening. I mean, these are basic skills, but somehow a lot of times people get it wrong. We get it wrong. We're too consumed in our own minds about things. So it's amazing. Like I think about why your success and what you've done. It seems to be part. Obviously, this is foundational for you.
To me, it's like second nature. Some things I've learned throughout, but one of the big ones is I read books on business early on, and I considered myself a businessman who happens to be selling this product, which is mind reading. So I kind of separated myself from the business, because when you have an agent, the agent can get the bad news, right? Let's say you didn't land the audition or you didn't land a deal. If you take that personally, if you feel like that's me, then oof, that's a real gut blow when somebody's like, well, I must not have liked you enough to hire you for this show, right? And I don't think of it that way. I don't take it personally. I separate myself, the performer, from myself, the business person, even though I no longer run my bookings, but I just see it as a learning lesson. What can we do better next time? And also try to create unique selling propositions, right? The USP, what's my value add when somebody hires me? It's not how great I am. It's what can I give you? Like for an event planner, I want them to know that this is a home run. I'm going to be easy to work with. I'm going to make them look good. And their boss is going to come up to them and say, where did you find this guy? And if it's about messaging, I'm going to make your product stand out. I'm going to tell everybody when they leave things that they're going to remember that are going to stay in their brain because they were tied to something educational or entertaining and emotional. So you're creating a value, because my world is mostly corporate, so that my corporate clients leave and they don't feel like they just saw a show. They feel like they actually had somebody like a product person who worked for them and did the most amazing presentation that everyone now remembers.
Gotcha. What was the largest crowd you've ever performed in front of? How big was it?
You mean live or on TV?
Either one.
So on TV, I did
Let's say
America's Got
live. Let's say
Talent.
live. Right. I know Americans.
Live,
So,
I've done several arenas. So I've done T-Mobile Arena, which I think at the time had maybe 13,000 people. I've done Verizon Center in DC, which probably had upwards of 10,000 people. So major arenas.
what's it like? Like, how do you prep for that? Do you get obviously getting nervous? I mean, you got to be. I just think about you have to be so on with your
Yep.
craft, and you have to be there. And there's this 13,000 people around, and then I guess then you got to connect with them on a deeper level because of what you're doing as a profession. What's it like for you? How do you prepare for that?
That's more nerve-wracking because I don't do that as often. So I would say my average shows range from about 250 people to about 2,500. That's makes up the bulk of my shows. And so what makes it different, I wouldn't say difficult, is there's so much more production value. If you're doing an arena, what I do, the core of what I'm doing is genuine, authentic emotional reactions. You see somebody out in the crowd or somebody you know or don't know, and you see them, that amazement translates. You can see it on mute. You don't even have to speak the same language. So oh my God. And so seeing that close up and personal and doing things that you know are not fake. So when I'm watching things on TV, I'm like, I don't know if he didn't talk to that person. I don't know if these are actors or staged. So you have to create that dynamic and proof beyond any reasonable doubt. And a lot of the ways you do that, like I was on ESPN this week. I did something for the Seattle Seahawks. And one of their guys, DK Metcalf, this thing has gone wildly viral. He took out his phone, and I'm like, you don't know me? He's like, I don't know you. I'm like, is there any way I could know your phone code or anybody here? He goes, no way. And I held his hand up to it. I did just kind of a body language read, and I unlocked his phone, and he grabbed that phone so fast. And the comments, if you go to ESPN, they put it on their main homepage and on their Instagram, are so funny because everyone's like, what's on that phone? Give me my damn phone back. And so that's real. That's real because I couldn't have paid him. I couldn't have afforded to. And that's a real reaction. And the same thing applies if you're hiring me for a corporate event. you know that, the CTO didn't rehearse this with me when they freak out. You can see it, you can feel it, you know these people. And a lot of the time it is you because the show is very interactive. So to answer your question, for like the live events like that, it's nerve-wracking because of the stuff that's outside of my control, which is what are the camera people doing? What are my mic runners doing? Let's say we're shooting t-shirts into the crowd. There's a lot of stuff that's beyond my control. And the same applies to any type of, if you're a presenter, and that event that I was telling you, I actually did for IBM. And it was a very fun one at T-Mobile Arena where they had me and Deep Blue. You remember that computer that could do like, and so the funny thing about it was a presentation where I could read minds versus, machine learning AI algorithms. Like how would a human compare at reading minds and body language versus the computer? And thankfully, I'm still ahead of the game. It might be catching up, but chess and Go and all the other games, but so far computers haven't been able to read people as well as people can. I'm sure that will change because like the micro expressions, the way cameras can read faces, I might be out of a job in 20 years.
But is it that you think it's like, because my company's an AI company, so I know a fair amount. Is it that it's the physical expressions that we can't get into the computer today? We can now, but is that what you think it is?
I think it's advancing by like leaps and bounds as to knowing what people, at this point, you don't even, I'm sure that the camera on your phone when you're doing TikTok and some of these social media has such raw data that
Yes.
even before your finger comes to it, just based on where your eyes move, I guarantee they know if you're going to flip through the video or stay on. Like the stuff that they're being able to process is incredible. But there's still always, I think people are creative and stay ahead of the curve and find ways to, for my field, be entertaining and appeal. Like I don't believe in psychics, but I'll be damned if psychics aren't still a multi-billion-dollar industry because people want to believe.
Yeah. Why is that? So you think you're not a psychic? So,
I don't believe
which
that
I
I'm
always,
psychic.
yeah. It's so what would be the difference in the profession then? Because you said that a couple of times. They seem similar to me. Like
I
you're
feel kind of ethics. So, for example, the two main things that a psychic does different than I do is purport to speak to dead people. So that's kind of a supernatural thing. And then give predictions for the future that you want to capitalize on. So I've made predictions in the past, like Super Bowl, Final Four, things like that. But I said straight up, I go, if you want to bet on this, that's on you. I told people, I don't know anything more than you do. I've just analyzed it really well. I've spoken to a lot of smart people within these communities. And I have a sense that like I can read people pretty well, but my core competency is not sports handicapping. But I was right a ton. I was right 4 Super Bowls in a row. And one of them was against the grain because I didn't go for the person who was the favorite. But then the next year I took it right on the chin and I lost. Everyone's like, oh, you suck. And I'm like, hey, I'm not psychic. So I didn't do it as a stunt. I did it because I genuinely thought it was fun. If I was psychic, my man, I'd be winning the $1.6 billion Powerball. Believe
well, that's
you
why
me.
I was about to ask you for the numbers. I saw that. I was like that's why I had you on the show the day before 1.6 million. Just
We're
to see if we.
splitting it down the middle, Rob. We're
That's not
splitting it
the.
down the middle.
Well, before the show ends, let's see if we'll pick 6 numbers, and I'll
We
split it
need to.
with you. It's like go online and buy. So
I'm
do
a
you
mentalist, and I don't even pick the numbers. I always do the quick picks because I'm too scared that
really?
I'm going to like get inside my head. And
You
God
kidding
help me
me?
if I won this thing, my life would be over because I would get I already get roughly 100 messages a week asking me for lottery numbers. I'm serious.
Kidding
Like on
me?
my DMs on Instagram. Oh yeah. So if I actually won 1.6 billion, I think it would not be a good thing.
No, people would kidnap you.
I
Kidnap.
think
They make
I
you.
really do believe that.
It's like so you also are a runner,
I am.
and you're not just like a runner. You do well obviously doing the marathon, but you also do ultra marathons, which
Yep.
is extraordinary. Maybe you could tell the audience a little bit what is that, and then talk about mental and physical uh, at the top of the game. Maybe just explain what it is, and then how you got into it.
Sure. So marathons, I think a lot of people know they become very like mainstream popular. It's 26.2 miles, 42.2 kilometers. They're all over the place. I did my first one when I was about 22 years old. So I was not a runner. I was not a collegiate or high school runner at all. People always like, oh my God, were you? No, I wasn't good at it. I wasn't even a good athlete. I swam in high school and I was not that great. But I got into running because my older sister, she ran a marathon, the New York City Marathon, and I thought that was crazy. Like to me, the same way that when I tell people I've run 153 miles, they look at me like crazy. I didn't believe my sister was running 26.2 miles because it wasn't as big of a deal 20 years ago to run marathons. Like, Oprah hadn't done it, is what I always say. Once Oprah did the marathon, people were like, oh, everyone could do a marathon, but this was before the Oprah effect. So there was some sibling rivalry, and I said, I'm gonna do a marathon too. And I said it on a whim, and then, she kind of busted my balls, and she's like, when are you doing the marathon? So I had to sign up for one. And I think I trained for 3 or 4 months. I did not read any books, which, folks, listen to me, read a book, or read a blog post, do something right. I didn't do it right at all. And I suffered through my first marathon. It wasn't terrible, but I really suffered the last 4 or 5 miles. But whereas my sister was one and done, I was hooked. I was like, I can't be done after this. I can get better. I trained for a year. I trained smart. Then I got faster and faster. Then I started winning marathons. I did a few Ironmans. I did the Ironman in Hawaii, but I really didn't like bike riding. So I went back to running. And then the ultra marathon is kind of like, if marathoning is the gateway drug, that's like the one toke of weed. This is like the cocaine because you start getting with the wrong group, which in this case is people who were like, let's go run 100 miles. And the first time I ran 50 miles, I didn't even really want to do it, but my friend did it. And he's like, you're not going to do it? And it turns out afterwards, we found out neither of us wanted to do it, but we both coaxed the other into doing it. You know what I mean? So it was like mutually assured destruction. So I did a 50 miler. It went great. I won. And then, I'm a competitive SOB. So as soon as I won, I just wanted to keep feeling that rush. I really like winning and getting better. And every time I kept improving. And eventually, the furthest I've run 100 milers, 135 miles in Badwater.
You
I
did
ran
135,
150 miles in Greece.
153 miles?
That's all at once. That's not like days. That's just like
No,
go.
I know. You did 153 in one shot. How long
Yeah.
did it take you to run? How long did it take you to run that?
Just over 33 hours. So like I started
So
Saturday morning
33
and I
hour,
ended
like
Sunday
no,
afternoon.
right. So no break, no real break, small
So I
break.
slept. I slept during that, which my buddy who did it with me ribbed me about. But my sleeps were 5 or less minutes, and they were. One of them was on a mountain where I literally laid on the ground on a dirt road of rocks, and I just said, "Wake me up in 5 minutes." And I kid you not, I laid down, and this is a woman who didn't speak a lick of English. She just spoke Greek, and I said 5 minutes, and I laid down, and she shook me awake right away. And I was like, why didn't you let me sleep? And she's like, you've been sleeping 5 minutes. Like I fell asleep before my head hit the rocks.
God. So how do you do it? I mean, it's like an extraordinary thing to push your body on that level. Once again, going back to your mind and your body, like how do you train for something like that in life?
So I think it's kind of like the same way that the mentalism happened is that it's slowly and in spurts. Like I didn't become a mentalist overnight. I used to do a little bit of mentalism, then I'd get scared and go back to magic and do a little more and a little more and keep. I had a crutch. So like that race in Greece is a great example. I went there and it's 153 miles. It's called the Spartathlon. It's considered one of the toughest foot races in the world. And the first time I did it, I was not prepared. Mentally. Physically, I was in good shape, but what I saw that day, and I dropped out at mile 76, which is halfway there, but what I saw is I saw people, like I'm talking about, how old was I at the time? 10 years ago, I was like 30 years old. And I am telling you objectively, I am in 100 times better shape than people that I saw running, like a 60-year-old man who's running in the middle of the night like nothing. And I'm on the side of the road, just a wreck. Like you could have taken me with a spatula and scraped me off the road. And I understood at that point that it's not physical. It's not physical. It's mental. It's all mental. If somebody had a gun to your kid's head and said, go run 50 miles right now to save their life, Rob, you would freaking do it. So I'm telling you, you can dig deep, you can find it, and it's accessing those reserves. And a lot of it is training your mind beforehand. So the next year I came back to do it. It was 2 weeks after my wedding. And I'm telling you, I had this mentality of like, if I can't run, I'll walk. If I can't walk, I'll crawl. But you're going to take me out on a stretcher. And I'm going to be in a hospital, and I'm going to be ripping the IV out before you take me out of this race. I am going to finish this race. And I went into it with a mindset that was like clamped. There's no way I'm going back home and not finishing this race. And so I think when you talk about entrepreneurs and getting over the wall, there's people here that have faced insurmountable. Their company is going under. Everybody's being let go. I'm sure what you had to deal with when the dot-com burst. Everyone's like, dude, give it up. It's done. And you got to weather the storm. You got to do whatever it takes and get through it. And you learn over time that it's all in your head. It's not the things around you. It's internal.
So, I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs I talk to are people like yourself who are maybe aren't running businesses, but doing amazing things in their lives. They usually had something in their childhood that got them to a place where they could persist until they succeed. You know what I'm saying? They don't quit. And that is a mental game, but usually they're given something that maybe wasn't a gift when they were younger. And so I don't know, was there something there that prepared you as a kid for that?
I wonder, well, I know a few things when I was a kid. So one thing that's unique is I was very, very good at math. I've always like had a very mathematical mind. It's why I went into engineering. It wasn't because I loved engineering, it's just because the math came easy to me. And so I always am calculating things. I can't explain it, but like when I watch that movie, A Beautiful Mind, I'm always doing that same type of thing. I always like count things. And so math was very useful to me in magic and in mentalism because having a quick mind is very useful. I think that like I wouldn't think of it because it's a trauma, but when my parents got divorced, I threw myself into magic in a way that I think if they had stayed together, I wouldn't have, because from an emotional perspective, I was very hollow. Like I was really, I was trying to escape. Like, you know, some ways you can escape into drugs or doing bad things or all different, like acting out, being rebellious. Mine was magic, and that's what I put myself into, and kind of seeked other father figures when my dad wasn't around that were other magicians to like learn from. And so now as an adult and having done some work, like I can see why a lot of this filled the gaps for me. And it's kind of like a lot of comedians. You don't find a lot of comedians who had happy childhoods because where did the comedy come from? They needed to be funny to get people's attention, to kind of get love they didn't get otherwise. So not to get too psychoanalytical, but I think that magic filled a void for me during years when I really needed it. And it without it, like I wish I could give my kids a passion. I'd rather they have a happy childhood, and it overall was. But I think a lot of the best things come out of something difficult, traumatic, and they create like scarcity. Like I never had a situation where I was always worried about money because from a young age I had to support myself. So it was always a thing where my drive was not just monetary. Once I started doing well, I always wanted to give back. I've instilled that in my kids. But I think that if I had grown up where I didn't have that drive, I would have been lazier because I couldn't afford to be lazy.
Yeah, that's what we kind of see over and over. There's this pattern of uh, if you hit a hard time and then you hit a series of hard time, usually there's something. I've just seen it over and over doing like 30, 40 of these interviews. There's something that happens into people's lives and they're young, and it's something that usually seems at the time like not awesome, far from that, but yet it's building something in us to prepare us for our future. And that's why I tell people like the hardship builds muscle, right? The hardship allows us to reach our dreams. Very few people, though, from the outside, it looks like you just did everything perfectly and you never struggled. Most people see people successful like they never struggled, but you've had struggles obviously to get where you are.
Oh, it's always the case. Isn't it funny? And I fall into the same trap where I watch people. I'm like, man, they just blew up. And it's
Yeah,
like, no, they didn't. You didn't see the hustle. You didn't see the come up. Like when I was on America's Got Talent, people were like, wow, where did you come from? Like,
yeah,
where did I come from? I've been working 10 years at restaurants, like going table to table doing tricks. Like, you know, it's been a real iteration, especially with the America's Got Talent. I've coached other people who've been on the show, and they were like, oh, it just came so easy. I'm like, man, I didn't get on the first time I tried out. Like, and
yeah.
I've had people that try out once and like, I'm never doing that again. I'm like, why not, man? So it's one of those funny things where you got to be resilient. You have to have thick skin. And you need to truly believe in yourself. And that confidence manifests itself. Like it really does. There's things I've pulled off where an opportunity arose. I said yes in the moment, even though I had no idea what I was going to do. And I let that force me into a corner. Take on some challenges. Take on big things that you don't know if you can do, because otherwise you're never going to push yourself to the next level.
We're coming to the top of the hour, and I guess you wanted to do one trick, and
Yeah. You know, I want to try
so
something. So right
okay,
before
go
we
ahead.
jumped on, we had a chance to talk to each other. We found out some similarities. We got three young kids, so we got a lot of the same path these
Why
days.
don't you? Can you guess if I'm tired or not? If my
We
wife and
both
I,
are. Look at us.
I was
We
gonna say,
both. We don't even have to look. We're both like, yeah, running a company, three kids. So here's what I want to do. I want you to think about something before your kids were born. Fair enough? Right now. Very important. This is spontaneous, impulsive. I want you to think of a trip, okay? In the past of somewhere that you've been to before where you had a terrific time. And I want everyone to know you are just thinking about this right at this very moment for the first time in your brain. You're just right now making a choice. Did you just think of a place that you went to? Okay, now hear me out on this, Rob. On the surface, this seems utterly impossible for me to know, right? Because it's not set up. You didn't think about this before. You just thought about it now, and in your mind, you could have thought of anywhere. Are we in agreement? But here's the kicker. Think about this, because later on, you're gonna think about it, you're gonna, oh my God, but I know who you are, right? you brought me onto your podcast. I could look you up. I could do my research. And frankly, the past is known, especially given the fact that everybody's on social media. So if I guess something from your past, your viewer, your listener is going to say, he must have looked it up. And I would say the same thing. But what nobody knows is the future. So I'm going to switch gears on this. Okay, we're going to switch gears because the past I could know. Imagine I have you pull up a map. I'm not going to have you really do it, but as if you did right now. And you spin the globe and you trace your finger along. And Rob, you stop on, we'll go with, it's a country that you would love to travel to, that you have never been to before. And like you're making a list and this is the number one place in the world you would love to go. Can you imagine putting your finger right there on a globe right now? Okay. Now, notice the way the question is layered is traveling is like eating. If you're hungry and you walk into a grocery store, you know what you want to do? You want to eat everything. You told me you had 3 kids. You probably haven't traveled that much in the last 6 years, not to mention COVID being a mess. So I knew you thought of a bunch of different places. So the first place came to mind. What I want you to do is I want a commitment. Do you have a piece of paper or a pad of paper in front of you?
Yes.
I want you to write down out of sight. So everybody knows there's no way I can conceivably see this on camera, but so we have a commitment. Write down that number 1 place on your list that you wanted to go to. Write it down now for me, please.
Okay.
And now you ask yourself, what's going over the wall? What's taking it to the next level? I want you to take and imagine that you've been to this place and it was amazing. It exceeded all expectations, best time ever. And you go, I can cross it off the list. Rob, put a line through that place. Put a line through it.
Okay.
And now the audible. You write down another place. Number 2 on your list. Write down the number 2 place on your list right after. Where is the next place you want to go to? Did you write that down as well?
I did.
Now here's my thoughts. I think that the first place is somewhere that I don't know if you've been near there, but it's been on your list and you've wanted to go, but you never went just there. So I have this gut feeling. I wonder if you've been to places around it, but you never got to it. And then I can't explain it. And let me ask you one question, Rob. Do you speak more than one language?
Yes.
What other languages do you speak?
Portuguese.
It wouldn't be Brazil. The first place on your list is Argentina, isn't it? Then you crossed it off and you're wanting to be adventurous. You wrote down Antarctica for your second place, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Can you show the camera? I know they're not going to see this, but you can literally hold this up. He has written down Argentina, crossed it off, and then Antarctica, folks.
I don't know how you do that. I know. It's like, yeah, and I didn't tell you that. I tell the audience I did not tell you that. So
You could have picked anywhere. You got a map anywhere in the world. And that's what I do, Rob. That's how we go over the wall. We don't just meet expectations, we exceed expectations. That's the number 1 rule in business.
okay, before we go, we're gonna pick 6 numbers.
Yeah, let's do it, baby.
Ready? Right. And I'm gonna buy the ticket, and I'm saying it here for a legal. This is our legal contract. We'll split it, but give me the numbers that you think we should do.
Here we go. Which number guest am I on the show?
This year or in general?
This year.
This year you would be number 10 this year.
Let's do it.
So far.
10 is our first number.
Okay.
10, then we're going to do 16, 19, 26, 29, and just so you have a little intellectual property in case we win, what's our Powerball, Rob?
8.
8. Okay, here's the problem. If this thing comes out before the Powerball and everyone buys these tickets, we're going to be splitting 1.6 billion a lot of ways.
No, this doesn't come out live. We're going to do it now. This will come out.
This thing is going viral if you and me both won it. This is going to be the podcast of the century.
We won't tell anybody, though. I won't put the podcast out.
Don't put the podcast out.
That's what both of our
SEC look into it.
I was going to say, exactly. So, Oz, I just want to thank you for being on the program. Just awesome. Once
Thanks,
again,
Rob.
I just think like when you think about what you've done in your life, you took this total other life that's not traditional, far from it, and you made an extraordinary life. And I just want to say thank you for being on the show, and good luck on Sunday running the marathon. Just like I hope you win it. I assume that's your goal.
Win it.
Is that your goal?
There's a couple of Kenyans that might be a little bit ahead of me. But last year I got 33rd overall, so it wasn't a bad year. I don't know if I'm going to do quite that good this year. I haven't been training as hard. I've been nonstop working the last few months. No excuses, but last year I trained even harder. We'll see. Next year's going to be a big year.
What minute miles do you run? Like, what's the average you run?
Last year I ran a 2:29, so that's about 5 minutes and 40 seconds per mile.
God. Oh my God. My God. I'm just gonna go like this. I'm gonna go like this. So with three children and doing the work you do, like you're just like on the top of the mountain there.
I'm
So it's
trying,
just
man. Well, listen, make it to Buenos Aires. I've performed there before, and if you go to Antarctica, call me. I'm coming with
I
you.
will. I'll
I,
take
I
you
want to
with
go
me.
with you. I've never been. I want to run a marathon on Antarctica.
Great. We'll do it together. Okay, Oz.
All right, Rob.
Thank you.
Love it, man.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you.